All right, so instead of a gavel, I have a bell. So good evening. I'd like to call the City of Mount Vernon City Council study session to order for June 3rd, 2020. It's just after 6:04. Tonight's a study session, so I want to welcome council and our staff to the meeting tonight and any of our public who happens to be dialed in on the conference line. Before we get going on the agenda, I thought we could do a couple quick updates of things. The governor had issued a new order so that we will be meeting virtually until June 17, right, Kevin? I think I got the date right.
Yes.
So, but we can do some expanded agendas and not simply just related to COVID-19. So next week's council meeting will again be virtual, but we'll probably add a few more just general work items to that particular agenda. So council members, just give a call if you have any questions about that when the agenda comes out. The other thing that we want to make sure is the council drive. So because of the pandemic, we've been printing off hard copies for you, which is great. And then because there's so much information, we thought that we'd put information in two different places. So it'll be in the regular packet for that particular week. So you'll have it on the date. And then because there's so much, there's also a separate COVID-19 pandemic file, which you'll find things like tonight in the council memo. So you have two different places because sometimes it's hard to remember which date and which meeting you would find that material. So hopefully that's helpful. And then if you have difficulty figuring out where to look, just give a call and we'll point you to the right direction. Good news, we received some information about a library grant that Isaac had been pursuing. He's on furlough this week, but I just wanted to share that as soon as we complete application, we have the availability of $3,000 of reimbursement for PPE, which is great. And $8,000 if we would like to deploy Wi-Fi hotspots. And I think we probably work in conjunction with the school district, about 20 hotspots, and they're willing to give us $8,000 for that. So I thought that was great news, and he'll talk in more detail, I'm sure, when he's back about using that. But that was just a good thing today. So, and then one last thing about the phase 2. So the we all know that the county had applied last week. We met all the legal criteria on Thursday for phase 2 on a call with Governor Inslee on Friday morning. Ron Wiesen, Commissioner Wiesen and I were excited about telling him we were going to put in our application at about 9 in the morning. And he told us that we might want to wait because they're going to add some more requirements. And so we were a little surprised, but the county applied. Then that was rejected and the county reapplied on Monday with a complete package. I will tell you there have been furious communications between Director of Public Health Jennifer Johnson, who's doing an amazing job, back and forth answering questions about the second application today, but have not heard anything as of yet. I do believe, and I didn't confirm this, I should have done that, the commissioners were planning to call a special session meeting tomorrow and intend to discuss the matter if we haven't heard from Department of Health. And so we'll see what happens tomorrow. So just wanted to let you know that we've been involved with a lot of conversations today between Department of Health, Jennifer, the mayors. So just FYI on that. So, and then that's it. So just want to make sure I got that out of the way. So first up tonight, our agenda item is a COVID-19 city response discussion. And so our finance director, Doug, put together a great packet to kind of walk us through some more discussion. And so I'm going to share my screen, but I'm going to try and go back and forth a little bit because it's hard to see everybody and try and make sure we're having good discussion if it's just taken up by the screen. So first up, I'm going to share my screen and we'll get going. So first thing we wanted to share that was in the packet is, starting with our goals again and just coming back to what we're hoping to achieve with the budget reduction revenue shortfall discussions. So you're all very familiar with that. And a document created this week I thought might help us just be a visual to illustrate, trying to convey when we think that we could make decisions. And so, of course, on the left-hand side is really where we're at now, and the limited information we have, the estimations of revenue and limited grant funding. And then on the bottom, you'll see what we've done as far as actions, and council's aware of this from Memos. So it's everything from service suspension. I didn't mean the officer supply budget, sorry, furlough and layoffs and things like that. And then we have just proposed that we would make decisions at a couple different time frames. And one particular reason that makes a lot of sense, particularly today, is we've got word about grant funding. So $3,000, that helps in some of our, bottom line. And so we're hoping that at the end of August, we would have a lot more information, actual revenue impacts from the stay-at-home order, plus 1 month of recovery in June. And then you can see we could do more actions that are in red and other actions in green if maybe we find out that our projections were right on and we kind of have a stabilization. So as you can see, I just thought maybe a visual walking through some of those decisions may help kind of help us figure out as we move forward. So that was that. And then Doug's gonna talk now.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council members. I don't expect you to be able to see this on the screen, but this was in your packet. It's Exhibit F. And so I just wanted to explain this. I know you've seen this before. We went over this before, but just kind of I updated the revenues, which is the top part, through the month of May. And so one of the things I wanted to explain about this spreadsheet is if you see in each of the rows, there's a dark column, or excuse me, dark numbers through May. Those are actual numbers that are coming in for each of those major revenue lines. And then the smaller, lighter colored are what initially I had projected through the year to come up with that $5.3 million shortage in the revenues. Now, so as I did this, I changed the January through May actual numbers and also the projected numbers to match the actuals, which changed the rest of them. So what I had to do is then refigure what those revenues should be if we're still going to kind of stay at that 5.3. Now, I know that sounds kind of confusing, but I wanted to share something that I kind of found a little interesting. That I feel is positive. Still wondering that 5.3. I was, if we're being conservative enough. If I would have left our projections alone, all the rest of the way through, we would have been about a shortage of 4.8 million right now. I still think, we don't know what's going to be happening in the next few months anyway, but as you can see in Exhibit F, just looking at the sales tax line, that number there through the rest of the year is $355,000. That's where we would have to collect each month, and then we would still, then that would be a shortage of $2.3 million. Last time you saw that number was about $390,000. So it's going down. Anyway, just wanted to share this with you. I'll keep updating this, and I won't go into all the detail each time, but I just wanted you to know about this. Make sure you let me know if you have any questions, and that's that. So I don't know if anybody has any questions on this right now.
Stop share so I can see. I had asked Doug to show it so that it kind of shows how, as this information, we get it and it changes, it kind of maybe lines up into that idea that we make decisions now and then we wait for things to shake and settle and then come back and look at it and where we're at. Because my hope is that, wow, wouldn't that be great if it went down to 4.8, by the end of August or something like that. Any questions for Doug?
So I did have a question for Doug on the sales tax revenue. The May numbers that we got are actually for March.
That's correct.
So those numbers actually weren't quite as bad as I was expecting to see.
Right. That's true. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I projected those numbers as being, actually lower than what we received in April. And let's see, the number I had in there was 300 and, like I said, $390,000. That number did come in higher than I was expecting. So I'm kind of trying to stay positive about this, that the rest of those numbers are going to keep coming in, not quite as bad as what we see.
So do we have any way to get a gauge on some of our major sales tax collectors? I know the council can't know who those are, but I'm just going to pick on Lowe's for an example. We've had a lot of folks off work, a lot of folks doing home improvements, and if you go down there any time of the day or night to pick up something for your home projects, you see the parking lot's absolutely packed. Are we able to determine if some of those bigger revenue generators are going to help make up some of that shortfall?
So what I could do is put together something for you guys by category. That shows that. Yeah, you're correct. We're not allowed to look at it by actual sharing any information by actual vendor, but I could put something together by category that we can look at and see, what's happening with the grocery stores versus, some of these box stores versus, retail and restaurants, where we can see that kind of stuff. If that would be helpful, that's something I could do for council.
I think it might give us an idea of the activity that's going on, and a lot, like I said, a lot of folks are doing home projects, and more people are cooking at home too. So we might see some surprises in those numbers.
Okay.
I think, Mark, that's a great idea. I think especially when our next collection that'll be coming and showing is going to be April. So that would be really kind of cool to see. Mm-hmm. That's that first full month of the stay-at-home order.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions about the revenues and how we track that? I think what Doug forgot to mention was on the bottom of that sheet, it's also the expenditures. So you can see how we're tracking every single department on we know all those details every single month too.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, if you're looking at that one for May, it's not done yet because we're still, our last payroll has not hit the end of, that will still be posted towards May, and that's not included in that number yet. The payday is on the 5th, so that will get in there, and then I'll update that. Okay.
Okay. Are we ready to, we'll go on? Okay.
Jill, can I ask a quick question if that's okay?
Yeah, of course.
In terms of municipal court, I'm just wondering, I know that district court is going to start hearing jury trials, as they're allowed to, in our municipal court and also over in Burlington. I know that the city signed a contract, and that's why when you look at your grid, there's a 0% change. But is there going to be any, I'm not suggesting the county give us any money back or anything like that, but I'm wondering will there be any, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe some sort of a, I don't know, maybe
a reimbursement?
Yes, a reimbursement for the fact that we're going to have to step up that courtroom with all of the safety protocols and things like that.
Yeah. So to date, I had spoken with Judge Goddard, and I know Chris can talk a little bit about some of the specifics of what they've kind of walked through and what they think their needs are going to be. And so I had made it clear that we are happy to help accommodate, but we're not there to shoulder their costs for the added costs. So what I was doing was kind of waiting for them to finalize what the needs were and walk through, and then be able to go back with a realistic, here's what our real costs would be. And we do kind of expect that to be covered from the county. Haven't got there yet for an amount, but definitely any impacts we want to have compensation for it.
Okay, thanks.
But excellent point. Okay, anything else? Okay, I'm gonna share the screen again, and our next topic is the CARES funding, and Doug's got some real updated information on that. There we go. Okay.
All right. So everybody knows that we did receive the notice that we were awarded the CARES funding. So I filled out a bunch of information, sent it there so they could do a contract, and we did receive the contract. So next week on June 10th, I will be bringing forward the contract for approval by council. And after it is signed by the mayor, we will submit it back to the Department of Commerce, where it said it might take up to 4 weeks to get it completely signed and executed. Once that is done, it is available for the funds will be available for distribution. But being that time where it's going to take like 4 weeks, that'll give us more time to look at, to develop the expenditure plan, how we're going to do this, and then at that point, I would bring forward a budget amendment we can go at it that way. I was thinking of doing the budget amendment right away today, but I thought we'd wait until we actually have the contract in place, signed, executed contract, and then we can bring it forward. So that's where we are with the CARES funding at this point. So it's moving forward.
And then Doug, this is something that I don't know if you want to talk about. This came from Commerce and some of the details of the actual uses for it. It's not to supplant revenue. So
right. So in your Exhibit E, I believe you have a document that talks about the guidance. It's the Coronavirus Relief Fund guidance for state, territorial, local, and tribal governments. I also received an implementation guide, and what you're seeing on this slide. Am I sounding okay? I'm getting a lot of okay. What you're seeing on this slide is at the very end of Exhibit E, so you have it there too. And basically what it is this just kind of a synopsis of, first of all, that this reimbursement is from March 1st, 2020 to October 31st of 2020. And we have to submit our last reimbursement by November 15th in order to get reimbursed for it. These are just the top or the 6 categories. I just thought we'd list the medical expenses, what we can use the funds for, the medical expenses, public health expenses, payroll expenses, expenses to facilitate compliance with COVID-19 measures, economic supports, and also other COVID-19 expenses.
Doug, did you want to tell a little bit about, there's kind of like a 5-question guidance if it would qualify?
Yes. Last time I gave oh my goodness, let's see here. Grab this really quick. Last week I gave an update on what those eligible costs are, and there is an eligible cost test that they're trying to make it as easy as possible to how you can use these funds. And basically those 5 things are, if you can stay true to these, the expenses connected to the COVID-19 emergency, the expenses necessary, the expenses not filling a shortfall in government revenues, the expenses not funded through another budget line item, and the expense wouldn't exist without COVID-19 or would be for a substantial different purpose. So if we can feel confident that we have a true statement on all 5 of those, they're saying that that is an eligible cost.
I thought I'd show you one more slide and then I'll take off screen share so we can see y'all. In a memo that we had given council, and in our small group meeting, we had kind of talked about what types of things that would, number one, be needed in the city to cover expenses, but also eligible. And so that's where this chart comes in. We thought there would be priorities because we're not really sure on the ultimate cost. So if at the very top you see, the 1,072,000 is the allocation. So our first priority at that time in those conversations was that we are to cover our unemployment liability and the federal paid leave entitlement funding. So as you see here, I put a red arrow because it's the guesstimate is 465,000. We're not really going to know that, until we're kind of finished with any kind of layoffs that would need to be made. And so there's certainly a round of layoffs already. And then I'm thinking at the end of August, when we get the kind of revision and make more decisions, that there could be more. So that particular number could go up. So we want to make sure that whatever that liability, it's covered through the allocation. The second priority was the proportion of salaries and the personal protective things that we've spent. And the reason why there's an asterisk is there's possible other funding. So like today, getting the grant from the state for the library, we can take away $3,000 of that in this category because we've got it from another grant source. So if you can see, that's why having kind of a flexible prioritization of what the needs are, and as we have it available, or if it comes available for something else, remove it from the list. That's what the intention was. And then priority 3, and that goes in, as you can see, technology and fingerprint scanner. The one thing that's different, and I put it in green, was the idea that if we had one Zoll monitor and one gurney system that can be used for a designated ambulance for any type of suspected patient transport, it's just setting up, getting the equipment to set up that one particular piece of equipment for the ambulance. So that falls under the 5-question test of, is it related to and all that. And then you just see the other things there. So that was just the proposed idea. It isn't anything to really have to decide tonight, simply because, as Doug mentioned, we figured we wait for the actual allocation before, and the budget amendment before doing anything like that. The one exception, as council knows, is I asked for the contract with Community Action for the $30,000 for hotel vouchers to use now. And that's something that can, of course, be reimbursed when the funds come in. So you'd have a hard copy of this, and so I'm going to stop the screen share so I can see everyone, and we can have conversation and ask questions and stuff about that. So thoughts about that. Mark, I think if you're talking, I'm going to unmute you. Oh.
Unmute.
Oh, there we go.
Sorry, I can get on the laptop now, but I'm still on the phone.
No worries.
Under the personal protective equipment and general facility supplies, and Chris might be able to answer this. I don't know if he's on or not, but you go into the grocery stores, you go to a lot of the different stores, and they've all got the sneeze guards and the different things, the signage down for the 6-foot social distancing. Is that part of this 28,000? That's all calculated into it, and we've identified all the areas that we need to do that in?
Yep, absolutely. So we have a small committee that has finalized our reopening plans for all of the different facilities for the city. Have acrylic kind of shields ordered, has signage ordered, have little stanchions ordered, with sanitization and all that kind of stuff. And I can actually show you, as just an example, we've got the checklist for not only the department, but we have checklists for each individual employee. So as we have more open up, with the phases, employees are going to be required to review a checklist of training, knowing what they have to do, sign that off, and then each department head has to do the checklist. And so we've leaned forward and ordered that equipment to have coming in.
Okay.
Yep.
That's good to know. Then the second question I had was on the laptops, headphones. Some of that's new equipment, some of it's replacement of equipment. Are we positive that the CARES Act will allow us to replace existing equipment?
Well,
Brad seems to question that.
Yeah, so we'll absolutely make sure that we can before. I think the equipment we're replacing is 6-7 years old, and so to be able to have the enough power to do even a Zoom call and like all of that kind of stuff, have bandwidth to work telecommuting, we'll make sure that it absolutely meets the requirement before spending a dime on that. You bet. Yeah. But again, we'll definitely have a lot more time to make those calls and have everything double checked before we even propose spending that funding. Any other questions from any other council members on that particular funding? Okay.
Can I bring something up?
Of course.
I just would like the council to consider, and the mayor and her staff, in terms of this CARES funding allocation. I don't want to forget about our small businesses. Part of this funding can go to small business. And if we don't have, if they're not able to generate sales tax for us, if they're not able to pay their property taxes, if they're not able to pay, city-owned rents, I just think that they're part of the community, and that yes, the city is going to put this money to very good use for its expenses, but I don't want to forget about them. And so if we could at least consider something for small business from this particular funding, I just want to look at that.
Okay, absolutely. It's a use that we can do. I think other things that can be flexing into it, and as things come in, we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of it for that too. So the CDBG allocation is that perfect example of the 100,000 to small business. And I think Peter has some information on what other potential funding could come forward that could be solely dedicated for that. And of course, as in those priorities, if say we have salaries covered by a FEMA grant and it frees up more of this grant, you know what I'm saying? How we can definitely flex in. And so I don't know, Peter, if you have something to share on the CBG possible allocations too.
I think I have the same news to share that I shared a couple of weeks ago, just that we are anticipating another wave of funding coming in, and that it could be comparable to the first amount, and that we would have the flexibility to allocate all of that toward whatever causes might be most pressing at that time. So that would include small business, micro enterprise grants.
Thanks,
that
Peter.
Could be another 200,000, which is a pretty nice chunk for that too. So yeah,
I kind of think about how nice our waterfront looks. You have District Brewing that has come in there and spent millions locally in our community to really turn that place around. And so I just want us to consider that.
You bet.
Can I jump in as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Melissa's identified a goal that I think we all share. So it's good to get it on the table. And then I guess the other thing too is, of course, the significant cuts that we're having to make temporarily or longer term to staff, and thus the services that we're providing to people. So I'm sure we're all concerned about that list of cuts to services. Excuse me. So one of the ways that we can make sure that we're spending money on people and businesses is to make sure we're careful with how much money we're spending on equipment. So I know several of us have been asking and looking at those numbers there. So if I had to decide, I would definitely put a priority over people and businesses than equipment. But the things that were essential for us to operate to turn the corner on COVID makes sense. But so I just wanted to recognize that there's a second goal as well. There's staff cuts and services to our community. I'm just very concerned about what I'm seeing at the Parks Department, the Development Services Department, and the list goes on, as you all know. So how do we fill those gaps? It's a big question.
I think it'd be great. What I'm hearing from council is that on our very first slide that we showed, when we have our goals, that we add something where we do as much as possible to support our small locally owned business, or I don't mean it's not small, but maybe locally owned businesses through any types of grant funding that the city can take advantage of. I mean, I could put another bullet in there. Is that?
I'd like to see that. I brought that up
okay.
Last week. I think it would be a good goal to have.
Okay. You bet. Okay. Any other? Trying to look at my memo. So we definitely, have more time to talk, and hopefully that'll be in person by that time. And who knows? By the time we receive the CARES funding, we might have more CDBG and all that too. So. Okay, great.
Just one little detail then. So the new table that you just showed with the CARES Fund allocation concepts, we now have the Zoll monitor and the gurney system, which I think was kind of the original 10 anyhow, instead of ambulance, although they're linked, obviously. What my main question is, back to the GEMT, I think we'll cover that in a minute, so I can hold tight. But there's a large chunk of money in there for equipment. And if we can meet the the lower threshold of less equipment with the CARES fund, that should free us up for GEMT or vice versa.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So I know you're thinking about that already. I just wanted to get the question out there.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Okay. We're gonna, the next up I had was review of the previous financial memos and decisions to date. I don't know, I didn't they were just included as exhibits in your packet. So I didn't know if there was any questions about that. I just put that in as kind of a placeholder. And I think I had just one slide. It was simply the proposed actions that are taken at this point. And I'll try and pull that up. Oh, oops. Which was this, just this, to date, if we got all the proposed reductions, we've got the unions to help us, like we planned all that, that's where we were sitting. So I had just put that there as if there was any questions, if you had thought about that over the week or not, so. And if not, we'll just go into our GEMT discussion, so.
Can I jump in one more time?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, to see the service changes anticipated through December 2020 is pretty jarring on Exhibit D. I know you showed that last week, but the closure of Kiwanis Spray Park and the delay of the construction of the 25th Street Park, which the funding, is pretty much in hand already, as examples of some of the service cuts in the middle of the summer, is just really disconcerting to me. So that's why I want to try to wring out some of the equipment and try to get some of those back in. I know you're thinking about that too. So I just want to put that back on the table again. I'm sorry to sound like a broken record. And then maybe more specifically, I have a question. The rental facilities are suspended at the moment. Of course, they bring in income, but you have to have income to operate them. And I'm sure we don't make money on them. So that's probably why they're suspended, because we put more money than we make, I assume. I have the same question, though, on the development services, which is a kind of an enterprise system where a lot of our money is recouped through permits. So how can we try to build some of those services back up, recognizing that they're also bringing in revenue?
So I'll address the rental facilities first, and that might help. So the reason why they're suspended is really at this point more to do with just the governor's orders and not allowing gatherings. So we would definitely plan on phase 3 to be able to go ahead and rent those facilities with the with the signed agreements that they're not going to go over more than 50 people or whatever at that time the phasing requirements are. I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute so I can see you. So whatever that is. And Jennifer and I have also talked about bringing forward to council adopting kind of a COVID-19 surcharge, because we would need to be doing a little bit more cleaning and things like that, and bringing back a monitor for like the Hillcrest Lodge. Normally we have part-time folks that are monitors for those events and are on duty while the rental is occurring. So we would have to pay to bring those folks back for an event as we open that up, and then the cleaning. So we want to look at the fees to make sure it's 100% covered before we open up rental facilities at the appropriate time. So does that help with that question?
It definitely helps. It
okay.
Provides a little hope on the horizon, as it's more about phase 2, phase 3
right.
than okay.
Right. At
That's
least
good.
That is, and then because of the budget shortcuts, we've got to make sure that it's covered. So it's not a net loss, right? It's a break even. Mm-hmm. And then in development services, that's kind of been a topic. And we actually had one of our employees ask me the other day, do you think council would take a look at permitting fees so that we are a little bit of a standalone, that the average taxpayer isn't really subsidizing permitting for development. And so that's been kind of on the discussion list for quite a while. I think council members been around know that. And so it's something we want to bring forward. And Chris Phillips is sort of ready to, how he loves spreadsheets and he does all that very detailed work. We're happy to bring that forward to council to consider as soon as we can possibly get together to meet and look at that. You bet.
I don't know if the other, it's really helpful. Thank you. I don't know if the other council members have seen the email from Development Services that lists the things that they're expecting they're not going to be able to cover and how much longer it's going to take to do permits. So that is our, revenue source in the next year, essentially. So we got to keep the permit processes moving if we want revenue coming in, additional revenue coming in next year. Everybody knows that. But if somebody hasn't seen that list of cuts, I think you should see that email.
Any thoughts? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Last thing is just the docket for comp plan amendments.
Yep.
Don't we approve that at the beginning of the year? Has that happened yet?
Yeah, we docketed 2 different things, I think.
Okay.
I think it's 2.
So we have the rest of the year to work through that. Okay.
Well, that's all ready to go. It's just we weren't allowed to put it on the agenda, but now we've freed up. So I don't think we got it on the 10th, but I think it's on the 27th, with the 4th meeting.
Again, several steps ahead of me, so thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Sorry, Melissa.
No, that's okay. You were kind of, I perked up when you were talking, Richard, because I have not seen the email that you're referring to. At least I don't think I have, but I am concerned that if we cut too much in development services, we're really going to risk slowing things down. And we have made such huge strides just this last fall with really, filling that gap for housing and things like that. So I just don't want to slow that down. And so if we need to look at some other avenues for revenue, I think now is the time.
I think Richard, what you're referring to is Chris has kind of a graphic of the number of permits and then the corresponding revenue. Is that what the one you're talking about that we shared?
I saw a narrative email that Chris has sent to multiple citizens and permit requesters.
Oh, the development community email.
Maybe so, and it had some red text in there about all the unfortunate changes.
Yeah. So Chris has been communicating with an email list, like a listserv to the development community, just saying, kind of updating them as we go. And so I'll forward that to you guys and then ask him to put council on the distribution list going forward.
That'd be great. One of the things that I was thinking as Richard was speaking, as we go through and things start to open up and develop, nothing prevents us from adding staff back in,
right,
as the funds justify themselves to do that. And if we're seeing a surge in demand in economic development or community, in permitting, that'd be an obvious place that we would start adding staff back in to meet that demand. So I don't think that's really a question of if we'll do it. It's a matter of when we'll do it. When will the demand be high enough to require more staff?
And that's why we've broken down into, there's some groups that have the actual layoff at this point, and then there's still a small group that are continued in what we call a furlough status, because we're hoping they can get called back in. And that's where the development services staff is kind of sitting in the unpaid furlough status, because we're anticipating some timing on that. So yeah, totally right. But I think too, bringing forward, making sure we're covering expenses is also a very relevant topic that we'll bring forward too. And then I'll send that email out to you. I think I'll find it and send it out to you tonight. Okay, excellent. Any other questions on any of that memo? Again, these are all just kind of guesstimates of where we're going, and we update them as you see Doug's spreadsheets as we get information in. So we're keeping on top of it as good as possible. So, okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go into our GEMT, and let's see if I can do this. And this is, I think we printed out a nice 11 by 17 hard copy of this for you. So I'm just showing you where to find your exhibits so that Chief Bryce can talk about it. And so I'm going to stop sharing since it's a big, humongous spreadsheet. and give the floor to Chief Bryce to talk through the GEMT stuff. So.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And so we started putting this together when we got the letter and we had a better sense of what are we looking at for our GMT and our reimbursement. The concept behind GMT has always been, from the federal government side of it, is to help departments that provide ambulance transport that understand that they never receive the revenue that it costs to do the business. And there's always expenses that go along with providing that service to the community. That includes the cost of vehicles, equipment, personnel, and everything that goes along with that, because there are certain provisions capping Medicare and Medicaid. GMT, again, is specifically to the Medicaid, where we receive approximately $175 per Medicaid transport, and that's the cap. That's all we'll ever get for that until Medicaid decides to raise that. But yet we bill that out at approximately $900 if it's an out-of-county resident and $675 if it's an in-county resident. So a little bit different rates. And that even those rates still don't capture the full cost. So what GMT does is it walks you through a process, looks at your budget, looks at all of your costs, looks at the disbursement costs from how much of Doug Valesky's time is spent related to medical costs, how much of the mayor's time, how much of my time, how much of the facilities is related to that, and put those into what is the true cost of a transport of that. And then that's what helps calculate those totals of that, with the idea that then those monies would come back and help fund the program. So as we got that, I started looking at the numbers that would come back and also what the needs are for the department. The fire department has very big needs from the cost of its equipment. As you are well aware, our vehicles are not cheap, they're very expensive. Our equipment, because they have a connotation of fire department / medical attached to them, by nature, that just raises the price that you get from vendors and the cost of the equipment, and they're very specialized in some of those pieces. So I started looking through what are all the big ticket items that our ER&R doesn't really completely cover in that, and we put some money towards that, but that's really focused just on our vehicles. It doesn't start to include those large ticket items like a $43,000 Zoll monitor or a $50,000 complete gurney and load system that has to be replaced every 7 to 10 years. It doesn't incorporate large ticket cost items such as hearse tools, airbags, rescue equipment that we carry on the fire engines as well when we have to go about replacing those. So I factored all those things in and developed a spreadsheet to say, okay, what are those things and what is the time frame that we think we might have those expenditures? And then I plugged in the numbers associated with what is a relative projection we think might come in as far as the GEMT funds going forward. And with that, I was able to kind of look at that and say, that spreadsheet, I think, articulates a 10-year plan that not only will take care of all of the capital needs for the city and the fire department, but also covers the 2 renovation pieces that are needed for our stations. What that does in reverse is it frees up those funds that would normally be dedicated through the budgeting process to the ER&R that we go through and come out of the general fund. It would, instead of coming forward and asking at the budget council meeting, say, or the budgeting process, these are the equipment that we need, here's the funding. If those funds are set aside, we know where they're going to come from, we know where the funding mechanism is, and we know we have those funds to purchase the needed equipment. And I'll go back to just a simple one of that is the Zoll monitors. We weren't able to put that in last year's budget, but we found very quickly how not having those in place creates a problem when we have to service the monitors, which need to be done on a fairly regular basis. Or if one breaks and we have to send it in, we don't have anything to replace it to put on the unit so it can still respond. If we look at COVID, we've been, knock on wood, fairly fortunate of the number of calls where we haven't had to ramp up extra units on a regular basis and needed that equipment to staff another ambulance with additional crews. That's just one small example of that. As I was sharing with the mayor, as an example, our truck for the month of May has been out of service 14 days. Out of 31 days, it has not been in service for 14 days due to mechanical issues. Eventually, at some point, we have that programmed in, I think, for 2023. Forgive me, I don't have the sheet right in front of me, but 2023. And hopefully we can make that. But if we don't have the funds in our ER&R, we won't do that. So this is just trying to articulate a plan that is fluid. Obviously, something happens and we can adjust what needs to be done in different timeframes. But the idea is at least there's a foundation of what is the relative cost we believe to be. And I did inflate all of the costs for the vehicles going forward. I tried to put a best guess estimate on where is inflation going with the cost of engines and trucks and equipment so that they're more realistic as realistic as possible, and threw those into the spreadsheet with that piece of it. That's the nuts and the bolts behind that. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions.
The chief,
go ahead, Mark.
Oh, sorry. So I've looked this over, and there's not a lot of disagreement I have with you on this. I think that using a lot of this to fund our equipment needs and future vehicle needs is spot on. The one thing that I would like council to consider is in 2024, we have a $3.6 million expenditure. In 2028, we have a $5.6 million expenditure. And those are for capital improvements at stations 2 and 3. What I would like to propose is that we find out what the actual cost would be in next year's dollars or the following year's dollars. And rather than lump this into 2 payments, is for council to look at issuing a councilmatic bond, start those improvements at stations 2 and 3 as soon as possible, and use the revenue from this fund to service the debt on those councilmatic bonds. The only other thing that I would like to see this year is for the 2020, we got 897,000 coming in. A case could be made that the cost of the employees that we're paying to run these comes out of the general fund, and I'd like to have a conversation about taking that 897 and putting that straight into the general fund this year only to help with that budget shortfall we're facing.
I wouldn't disagree that that's an option. I think it's one of those fluid things as well. If that's factored in right now, it would certainly make that, that shortfall that we still have a little bit better. And then as we hear back on maybe the SAFER grant or other things, and things can definitely be adjusted. But that's absolutely something that we would want to 100% look at. Other thoughts, council thoughts on that funding for this year to help make up shortfall?
Well, I know that we had talked about the GMT revenue and had discussed holding some in case after they true up the figures, we would maybe need to pay some back. So I hear what Mark's saying and I agree with that. I'd like to be somewhat protective of a little bit of that money just in case we have to put anything back.
No, I don't totally disagree with you on that. We were talking about a number about $225,000. Right now, we're looking at using 1.5 million in fund balance. And if this, and I know part of this was I think dedicated to go to the general fund this year, but if we can make up a big chunk of that difference. And next year, if we're audited, I mean, it could go the other way. They could audit us and say, "Oh, we short paid you. Here's an additional check." That'd be fantastic. I understand your concern. I'd rather look at taking 225,000 out of the fund balance next year to pay that back versus 1.5 million today.
I could be persuaded.
Other thoughts from council? I mean, I know this is a ton to digest. And I think what we're looking for tonight is some initial thoughts on just taking that funding and putting it into our sort of planning around general fund shortfall this year as we really work out. I think Doug can work on putting together what it would look like to do councilmatic bonds and sort of what that debt means and all that. I mean, we have time to do that as well. But initial thoughts is, I don't know, maybe I'll pull the council if, Richard, I think you're off mute. What do you think?
Yeah. I know we talked about the GEMT and the potential to help us out on stations 2 and 3. So it's still an interesting idea to flesh out. And I think I talked a couple, 3 weeks ago also about the, whether we save it or use it to show that we're buying down that gap a little bit now. And if we have to come up with a general fund next year. So I like the idea that Mark reiterated. I do have the sort of outstanding questions still about what the priorities are from the fire department. I think that we have Fire Station 1 that's still out there. And I know that there's a lot of question and concern about potentially running a bond issue this year, given the crisis and the financial implications of the crisis. But I wonder if the fire department still has the same priorities, we still have the same priority, why would we also not look at how we could utilize the funding to help us be successful on Fire Station 1 instead of 2 and 3? So I don't think we have to answer that today, but it's a policy question I have.
Aaron, do you want to chime in? What do you think? Any thoughts on GEMT and use of it for this year?
Sorry. Okay. I like Mark's plan. I think that's a really good idea.
Okay. Okay, great. Iris, any thoughts on the use of this funding to put in for this year for general fund? Oh, I'm going to unmute you. There we go.
Yeah. I think we are in the same page. Then I'm agree too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Mary, you said you could be persuaded, I think. Gary, what about you? What do you think?
I'm in on. I'm not really in favor of doing a ton of fund balance. So I think Mark was right on some of that. That we do the 200. What was it? What did you say, Mark? It was 2 what?
Well, our reserve that we were going to set aside out of the 897,000 was 225. And I figured if we have a shortfall next year, they come back and say we overpaid you, we can tap fund balance for that. Because the other side of that coin is they come back and say, oh, we underpaid you. Here's another check. So 225,000 coming out of fund balance versus 1.5. I'm a little more comfortable with that.
I would totally agree.
Okay. And then Melissa, did I overlook you? Thoughts?
That is music to my ears.
Got it.
I do want to kind of address what Richard was talking about with Fire Station 1. I think we can all agree that the health and safety of our first responders, should be the #1 priority. I feel like Fire Stations 2 and 3. We can make every excuse in the world to why we need to maybe put these off, but I think that that's doable in the more, sooner than later. It's just more doable to me, and I want to explore more about issuing councilmanic bonds and getting these updates sooner, as opposed to waiting and us continuing to put our first responders at risk, and then the costs just continue to escalate. So that's kind of where I am. That makes sense.
You're talking to your other council members, so I won't answer. I think it makes sense, but
just making sure. Sometimes I ramble.
Makes perfectly clear sense to me.
Yeah. Agree.
Okay. So how about this? In Doug's spare time, I think he's got the auditors with him right now. And so as his next thing, we can talk about just like hypothetical, giving you guys an idea of what our bond capacities are, how the council monic affects maybe a voted bond. So we can do some refresher on that for council. So, okay. Any other questions for Chief on that? I thought it was a lot of great work, to kind of be visionary, to take the opportunity and really, line out how to solve all of those infrastructure issues with the exception of Fire 1. But I thought that was great news personally. So, okay, good.
Can I just quickly say, Chief Bryce, I really appreciate your very large graph here. You can talk to me until you're blue in the face and I'm getting it, but not getting it like when it's all laid out like this in a plan in color. And so I know it takes time to do things like this. I'm just very appreciative. So thanks for taking the time and laying it out where my little brain can wrap its head around everything.
You're most welcome.
Okay, awesome. Trying to figure out where where we are on our slides. Okay, so that was our GEMT. So this is not updated, but this is this idea of, you know, how Doug does his handy dandy spreadsheets when we're in council and we can play and you can put things in and out. So when we're able to meet in person, you know, we kind of anticipate having this as, where is our shortfall? So the top line of 5.35 million, that could change. You know, maybe it's 4.8, right? We can change the number for GEMT. Currently, this is old, so 383. So if we put 897 in there, so we'll have all of those things to play with as we make the decisions going forward. But I just thought I'd explain that that's the intent of having it kind of condensed into one thing we can work with. So. And then the same thing again, just reiterating, you know, federal government funding, things like that could change and be flexible moving forward. I will say I spoke with Senator Cantwell's office today and kind of got just an update of where the Senate is on some of the federal money for local governments. The House did do a bill and sent it over. Senator Murray worked on a bill for local government direct funding, and the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Mitch McConnell, has rejected all efforts. So they're just continuing to work on it. I'm assured there is bipartisan support. It's just putting together a package that will be able to be brought to the floor to discuss. So I think they'll still work on it in the next few months. They're not going to have our governors and mayors and county commissioners be quiet for sure. So I'm hoping we'll have some news on that this summer as to some direct funding to cities. So I thought it was heartening news. I mean, we can think what we want about what they do over there, but okay. Doug, do you want to just touch briefly on the MRSC document that you had included in as an exhibit as well?
Try that again. Sure. So Exhibit G, what I did is I just tried to was looking at our fund balance and reserve policies. And I think this is something in the future we're going to have to do some work. They were last updated in December of 2016. But I think our reserve policy, particularly when it comes to the general fund, is going to need some work. But what I did is I just extracted some information from the MRSC document, the fund balance and reserve policies, that kind of talks about what is the fund balance versus what are reserves, talks about the key components of it, the scope and the purpose, the appropriate fund balance level, and exactly then what are some of the things, why would you use, what are you using it for? I mean, we have a fund balance, a fund reserve, and so council we need to make sure we have a policy that states what it's for and what has to happen for us to get it and use it. And then also one of the things that our policy doesn't touch at all is if we use those, how are we going to replenish it? So I think that, you know, looking at page 3 in that document where I highlighted, do you have a buffer against economic downturns? Obviously, that is a legitimate reason for using fund reserve. But again, we need to make sure that we also have a plan on what we're going to do to replenish that. It states in here that normally, you know, to replenish it should take like 1 to 3 years, or, you know, but some kind of a plan that we have. So I would like to spend some time when things settle down here to kind of go over this fund reserve policy and revamp it. But in the meantime, just wanted to make sure you guys had the information that MRSC says exactly about what fund reserve is, why you use it, when you use it, and how to replenish it. So any questions on that at all?
I just want to say I did read through that thing and it was really great information. I appreciate you putting it together for us in a easy to read packet.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Doug. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask, how did we end up last year with our fund reserve? Were we at 16 some percent, and how many thousand over the 15% current policy is that?
Okay, we are exactly at 15%.
All right.
Yeah, we did come up with throughout the year there were budgetary savings. We did end up buying some police equipment at the end of the year, but we are also short on revenues last year than what we had anticipated. So yeah, that's thank you for asking that. But that's one of the things I do need to bring forward is talk about year end and what those numbers are and stuff like that. We are in the audit now, so nothing is finalized. But yeah, we ended up right at 15%. In fact, it's like 14.9998 or something like that. So I'm going to send a collection for a couple bucks and we'll put it in there.
So really nothing extra, but still all of that is, they are rainy day funds. So, okay, thanks.
Yep.
So Doug, I asked you a question the other day and I appreciated your answer, but I don't think the rest of the council has been made aware. I asked you about our cash flow. When we start looking at shortfalls in revenue and everything else, the first thing we think of is we can't pay our bills. And I asked you how the city's cash flow was. Would you mind sharing that with the rest of the council?
We had a conversation on that?
Yeah, we did. Has it changed since we talked? If it's changed since we talked, I don't want to talk about it.
Actually, no, a good point. And one of the things that I did do is I did put together a cash flow document that shows every month the cash that's coming in and for our governmental funds, and then the expenditures that are coming out. And one of the things, and I will share that, but one of the things that it really shows that is good is one of the reasons that we do have a fund reserve, and it's for that influx of, we have our expenditures are they're pretty consistent throughout the year. We actually are more heavily expensed in the beginning of the year, but our revenue stream does not come in that way. We get our revenues we get like in May and November for the property tax. Those are a majority of our big revenues. So if you look at our cash flow right now, we're really negative because, well, not right now because we just received May's property tax, but prior to that, you'll see that our cash flow, we have a lot less money coming in that's going out, and then all of a sudden we have this big influx. So as being the fund reserve is what is needed to make sure that we maintain, have that for that cash flow. Obviously, it's not the whole amount of that, but there is a reason for that. So I'll make sure I get that document out and share that.
But the bottom line is, right now we're not strapped for cash. We're not unable to pay our bills.
No, absolutely. We are paying our bills, and we're not having an issue with that right now, particularly since our property tax came in exactly as we expected it to.
Okay. All right. So thank you for the good discussion. Hopefully the documents kind of helped us walk through that. It's so hard with Zoom to figure out how to be clear and all that. So thank you for that. Okay, item B is a ratification of emergency executive orders, and our city attorney, Kevin Rogerson, is going to present this.
Thank you, Mayor and members of City Council. This is no new news, but an extension of previous orders that you have previously ratified pertaining to the closing of public facilities. And then in Order 03, we had closed the city library and playgrounds. This would continue such closures until July 4th. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mayor, that phase 3 is basically the phase where we start opening up these type of facilities.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So we'll see what happens between now and July 4th.
Any questions for Kevin on this?
I would move that council ratify the mayor's executive orders.
Second.
Motion by Mark, a second by Melissa. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Hopefully, who knows when phase 3. We're just going to get to phase 2. That's what we're going to do. Okay. And then lastly, for the good of the order, I asked Chief Kamek to just give an update on police services. And so I'll turn it over to Chief Kamek.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. We've taken our attention a little bit off COVID the last week or so, and have turned our attention more to kind of what's going on across the country, and as I watch the news tonight, really across the world. Just to kind of maybe re-highlight Sunday, I know I sent you guys email on that, but perhaps people that are watching, we got a public social media post about a protest event that was going to occur at 1 o'clock Sunday. We started getting that information early around like 10:30. We were able to locate the organizer, and we got I think some good lessons from this. Now, first and foremost, the organizer's original intent was a private group, sent it to 25 or so friends in a private message. Somehow that got then reposted into a public place, and then the things changed from kind of what the organizer had originally intended. But she took on that responsibility, and so when we contacted her, we had a really good conversation, so we understood where she was at with that, and we offered, some of our help and guidance with it. Not directing what they should do or could do, just talked about some of the things that we've experienced with that and how to really set up this thing to be as safe as we possibly can and be able to have them achieve what they wanted to do and us achieve what we needed to do. I think first of all, again, events for that were planned to be static down at the courthouse, just a standing display, messaging, that sort of thing. And then as they got there, the group made a decision that, they would like to do more, get more visibility. And so about 15 minutes into the event, we learned they were going to march out to Riverside and College Way and have another display out there. So kind of on the fly, if you will, we had to make adjustments. And again, credit back to the organizer here. She made contact with us, let us know what had changed. We worked through some details on that because moving that many people, there's things that need to be thought about, and moving, hundreds, 1 or 2 people in there that haven't prepared for that can be challenging for them as organizers. So we set up traffic control and assisted with it. They stayed really on the public sidewalks. There's a few times that the sidewalks just couldn't accommodate and they needed to take a traffic lane, and we assisted them with that, trying to make it safe. And again, the cooperation was really good. And then they proceeded to Riverside and College Way, had their event there, and then walked back. Group divided, I think, at like North 4th. So some went up over the hill and then some went into downtown. Very respectful the entire way. And we worked with them. And then they came and did a conclusionary statement, and most were done at that point. I think a lot of credit to this, I think really goes to our broader community, because when I heard about the event, I went to a couple of our local social media pages and just looked at kind of what the comments were, what the popularity, and an overwhelming sentiment there from local folks was civility, peacefulness. Let's not be like what we're seeing across the country or in Seattle or those things. Let's be Skagit County, if you will. And I really think that tone had an effect. And I think the people that attended that event had that same mindset and sentiment and commitment. And so I think, collectively we were able to everybody achieve what we needed to achieve in that. So I say all that because if there's, people watching this, I guess I just encourage is as there's going to be more of these, we know people are angry. They have things on their mind they want to say about this and this incident and, policing. And we have no problem with that. It's just we're more effective if we work together on these things. And I think Sunday is a great example of that. And in the interim, I should say since that day, of course, there's been more rumors and information either on social media or whatever of additional events either coming here from out. You know, we've checked in with some of these organizers from that to help us understand that as well. But it's also really created a lot of anxiety in specifically our business community because there's really been two factions going on. One, a civil demonstration about you know, really specific issues and doing that in lawful and appropriate ways. And then there's another aspect of this that was just purely a criminal element. It's taking advantage, in my opinion, running under the cover of something legitimate. And we kind of saw that lawlessness that went on. And so, you know, it's very rightful that our business communities felt that way. So Tuesday afternoon, I met with the surrounding chiefs and the sheriff. They had the same feelings and concerns. So we organized or have started to organize a more united front on this as far as like right now, one of the things that we're doing is we have a dedicated security and response group of law enforcement. And right now it's Burlington, Mount Vernon, and Skagit County. Anacortes and Seawoolley, you know, both geographically are better situated. They're staffing some of them. We'll have the capability to respond and help them. But because they're out to those sides there, it made more sense to concentrate it, you know, up and down the corridor right now. And then again, we're very flexible to adjust as we need to from there. We're running that in the evening times when businesses are closed, and we have hours that we think are effective for that. We're also monitoring, you know, information that's being sent in. We're encouraging the community and business owners and people that as they hear things, you know, please share. Let us, you know, follow up on it as we can. Sometimes people go, I just don't know if this is true, so I don't want to bother the police. It's fine to bother us. We're, I think we're all in this together on this particular situation. And I know that the topic that people are upset about might question whether or not, you know, we're aligned with that. But irregardless of the topic or issue, you know, we serve the needs of safety and the ability for people to express themselves, you know, in a safe and civil environment. And these individuals that are creating the more lawless acts don't have the right to infringe on that either. So, you know, that's our focus, and that's our mission in this, if you will, or our purpose. And then we're also working together collectively to try to provide staffing and equipment and resources as additional events decide to be held. You know, our preference would be as much advance notice as we can so we can help them with those and staff them. But we know some of them have, you know, they're just organic and start up, and we'll work with them as well. So a lot of our time over the last few days has been around that. We've also tried to, you know, be communicating with the community in just different ways. I think really from my perspective is, you know, just, I guess, trying to remind folks in these times of at least the times before this that, you know, we have worked so hard to work alongside you and with you and be a part of you and stuff like that. And I hope you don't forget that in this process. And at the same time, we understand, you know, where you're at this place in time, and I won't get in the way of that either. We will help the groups through that, and we will participate to the level and ability that we can. So that's kind of, I guess, what's going on related to that right now. In the middle of the event Sunday, we had a domestic violence that turned into a barricaded subject for a while. He had a rifle. We had another call where a neighbor broke into another neighbor's house and assaulted him with a hoe handle or something like that. So I say that only because in addition to what the focus is that's going on, we have these other community issues that are going on that we're servicing at the same time. And so we're trying to address all of those in the most effective way that we can. So with that, if I can answer any questions or help you with anything you've heard, I'm happy to do that.
I just want to say, Chris, I did go down to the courthouse on Sunday and watched the beginning of that protest. They were so civil and compassionate and kind to people that were talking that maybe they didn't agree with, but they were able to let them speak. I wasn't able to do the march, but I did follow them up the hill and went to their different stopping points. And your staff, your crew was fantastic. They were so respectful and just helpful. And I heard a lot of things on social media later about how great, especially I think it was Officer Shaddy. Was he out there on the bike?
Yes, he was.
Yeah, he was. They really liked him, but he was probably right there with them. But they were very complimentary of all of the police. So I just want to say, job well done for both sides. I thought it was a really good example of how things should go.
Thank you. And I should also include in that Skagit County Sheriff's Office actually helped us with that too, and may or may not have seen them. And Burlington had some units on standby and stuff because this was all really put together on short notice. And we brought in some additional staffing on short notice too. But yes, thank you for that.
Yes, Chris, I just personally would like to say thank you for everything you and your staff in the community are doing, taking good care of our community. It's really, it's very warm and see how all of you care about our community. Thank you very much. And I don't have words how to appreciate the very neat and warm and kind, empathetic and compassion way you care about our families and the community. Thank you very much, and we really appreciate your job in the community.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Any other council members want to have a comment or a question? Okay.
I would like to
go ahead, Richard.
say something. Thanks, and I too wanted to thank the team. It seems like that worked really well. The other thing I wanted to comment on was the underlying reason for the protests, essentially the murder of George Floyd. I've had the opportunity to see the police department up close and personal for the last few years, including the Citizens Academy, and just have been so impressed and continue to be extremely impressed with how this organization is run and essentially the policy and what's the right word? Just the relationship with the community. So I wanted to say kudos on all of that and thank the team for all the work they're doing. There's some of the reform folks are talking about a lot of the information is coming from an effort that was done in 2015 called the 21st Century Task Force on Policing. And I'm sure that we're really familiar with it. And it covers a lot of things that the organization does extremely well, like building trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight, technology and social media, communicating policing and crime reduction, community policing and crime reduction, training and education, officer wellness and safety. I'd like to maybe someday in the future, sooner rather than later, have a discussion about those topics and how we're doing and what else you feel we need to be doing. But like I said earlier, it just seems like we're so far ahead of many other places. And I really wanted to thank you and your team and the mayor as a lead, just for all the work they're doing. So we're very lucky in this community.
Thank you.
Yes, we
Yeah, I have
are.
a
We are very
comment.
lucky.
I have a comment concerning to Chris. I too want to thank all that they do for our city. I was just wondering if Chris, do you want to go into any details as far as how many are in this task force? And I think it would be kind of good just to let them know that the downtown businesses, what is actually happening. Are there like a group that will respond if there's a problem, or is it that we have a presence down there every night or so?
Yeah, we have dedicated a group or a team that has two fundamental purposes. One of them is to concentrate their efforts in that business corridor solely. The only thing that would, reroute them is, something that was, so large in our normal services area, but this is a dedicated group for that particular area. And it's a high presence working through that, through all of our commercial corridor there, up and down between both communities. And then the second aspect of that is they're equipped and they have the skill sets behind them to do interdictions for this type of activity. So if a group comes in that wants to try something like that or whatever, these are folks that have some background in that as well. And so it kind of serves both those sides of it. And that's also why with this group, there's no borders or there's no jurisdictional boundaries that prevent us. If we need to go west, we'll go west. If we need to go east, we'll go east. And we're centered up and down, the important parts of the corridor here. And right now it's staffed at a size that we feel is effective enough to be able to respond. And we also need to remember that we have units on in Skagit, Burlington, Anacortes, Woolley, and Mount Vernon that all can divert to come support these groups. So, I think we feel for what we know right now, it's an effective measure. We have a schedule and a timeline that we're working them through. It's not a short one. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to continue to evaluate that based on the overall, climate of what's happening as we determine either to scale it down or to scale it back to normal services.
Yeah, I think it's just great what you're doing. I mean, I think it's a lot better to be proactive on some of this and have a plan than to be having to react. And you see that across the country. Sometimes it just looks like it's a reaction rather than, which is, it's really hard to deal with sometimes. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I'd just like to say to Chris, I really appreciate the work that you've done. Even prior to becoming the chief, you helped develop policies that kind of, I want to say, separated the chaff from the wheat. You've put policies into place that people that were questionable or their behavior would be questionable when they're dealing with the public, we just flat didn't hire them. And I think that's a testament to your commitment to the community. I think that's why we're in a position now where we can work with those that are going to organize and have demonstrations and be able to keep a good relationship with them. So I just want to thank you for your years of leadership, not just the short time you've been chief, but going back into time with the policies and procedures that you've developed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And can I just say, it feels like I've been a chief a really long time in times like this. So, I just like to say too, I don't think the word is lucky when it talks about what we are. I think, I've been here 30 years and I've lived here 50 something, I won't tell you my age, around here. And I've always given credit to my predecessor, especially the leadership in, the philosophy of what this future community needed. And this goes clear back to Ron Terry. It goes back to Mike Barsness and everybody else along the line. They saw the disconnectedness that police were having back in 50s and 60s and 70s. And I still remember the very first 4-hour training block on community policing and how that went over. And the years we worked through changing attitudes and changing philosophies and changing who we hired and changing our programs. And, you know, and early on, the resistance to some of those programs that they weren't tough enough on crime or whatever. And to me, that's an investment. And it's not just the police department that had to do that. There was mayors and councils all the way along that had to support that through investment. And I just really feel that that investment is today where it starts to pay dividends back. It's times like this when, you know, our character's called into question and, you know, what it is that we're about to do, that I feel very lucky, if we want to use that word, or fortunate to have the ability to point to very specific things that we've done along the way to not be apart from what our community is, but at the same time be able to recognize the fact that they may feel we are, and they're looking around at other communities that may not have had that that same style of investment. I've really resisted you know, coming across it all as judging another community in this, because I can only speak for our own, but they may have not had those same experiences, and then they've moved to our communities, and they come into our communities and they've had those experiences, so they're suspicious until they get to know it. I recognize that, and work very hard in those cases where there's suspicion to try to show them the other side. I'll even acknowledge, like earlier in this week, I had a couple of folks that called and felt that we came up short on calls, on a call we went to for service. Looked into it. One of our sergeants went out, felt more could be done on that. And so he shored things up and went out. So, you know, we know we're not perfect on all of these things, but I think we put those reactions aside and we try to go out there and hear and listen and try to meet expectation. It's just sometimes the nature of our work, the laws that we have to follow, the procedures, the policies, the training, sometimes we're unable to meet the other side's expectation. And some of that is because they're not aware of what the expectations are upon us. So to me, that's just a continuous journey that we have. Oops, I apologize for that. As we go forward, we'll just continue to work on that. So again, thank you. Sorry, you get a bell in the background.
Awesome. A couple of things that that I've observed, and Richard, you brought up the 21st century report. What may not be widely known with this group is that Sue Rohr, who is the chair of the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission, I don't know if I got all that right, who is the Basic Law Enforcement Academy, like in charge of how we train our police in Washington State, was part of that commission. So, you know, our officers come out with the mentality of guardians of democracy, and that might not be true of every state academy. So that's kind of cool to know too. The other thing that I was going to share, and I don't know if Chris is, I hope it's okay. So I was able to sit down and talk to the police staff with Chris. I was there to talk about budget and sort of COVID stuff, but it happened to be a time to talk about what had experienced in the country. And Chris led the department and opened it up for them to just share what are they thinking, you know, like personally. And so it was interesting to hear officers speak, and most of the comments were sharing that when they have been out in the community over the last couple of days, people are thanking them. They're taking time to come up and appreciate them, which I think is pretty awesome. So that was nice to hear. A few middle fingers to the new guy, which was interesting, but overall, I think our officers are willing to talk through what it feels like to them and how they are a part of making things better and keeping that feeling in the community. So I thought that was great too. Okay. Moving on. Anything else for the good of the order? Anything we forgot to bring up or? Okay. One thing I was wondering, so next week we're still supposed to be meeting virtually. Would you be okay with us publishing the agenda with a special time of 6 o'clock instead of 7 to have our council meeting?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, on that too.
Okay.
Yes.
What I think we'll also do is because it would be in normal circumstances, it would be a Public Works Committee. So I will ask for Public Works to give a quick 5-minute update on anything that may be relevant or have question and answer with you. So, okay, Doug, do you want to make sure you note that down? Okay. Kevin, do we have to have a motion to change the time of our council meeting next week?
No, what it will be is a special meeting, so you just post it 24 hours.
Okay. Okay, great. With that, then we have concluded our agenda items. And Kevin, is there a need for an executive session this evening?
Yes, I'd invite the mayor and members of City Council to enter into an executive session to consider the selection of a site or the acquisition of real estate by lease or purchase when public knowledge regarding such consideration would cause a likelihood of increased price. 15 minutes, no final action after.
Okay. With that, then we'll be adjourned into executive session, and the time is 7:34.